Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, August 2nd, 2020, and today I'm going to be taking a look at a 2020 Senate election projection. So I make these around 2 times a month, or at least I'm going to start making them 2 times a month. I've been doing them every month leading up into the election. I did this in 2018, so we're going to do it now. Makes sense. So these Senate races don't typically change that much. The Democratic Party and Republican Party typically have around an equal standing in a number of these races, and that usually doesn't fluctuate. There are some races where the nominee definitely depends as to whether or not this race will be competitive. Kansas is a prime example. If Chris Kobach is the nominee, which is decided in 2 days, on Tuesday in Kansas, he very well could make this race very competitive. If Roger Marshall or any other of the Republicans enter into that race and end up winning the primary, then it could end up with a likely Republican characterization, but I don't think any of the GOP candidates would have made it safe Republican. So that's one race in particular, but there's a number of races around the country that primaries are going to be held, or at least have already been held, that pretty much determined whether or not these races will be competitive. Massachusetts won't be competitive for the GOP, but there's a very competitive Democratic primary between incumbent Senator Ed Markey and Joe Kennedy III. Well, Representative Joe Kennedy III. This is pretty much a progressive versus centrist showdown, very similar to what a one-on-one Bernie Sanders-Joe Biden nomination fight would be. But we're taking a look at the overall Senate map, and let's go ahead and fill in all of the safe Republican states. We don't need to talk too much about these states because we all know how they're going to vote. Yes, they were competitive 6 years ago in 2014, or at least had Democrat incumbents, for example, Arkansas, but that same race and a number of other races, Democrats aren't even fielding a candidate because they aren't wasting money on races they know they cannot win. So we're characterizing all of the safe states. Tennessee is an open race, I understand that, but there's no Phil Bredesen this time around. It's not competitive. So that puts the Republicans at 39 seats. The Democratic Party currently at 35, but I have yet to fill in all of the safe states. New Mexico is an open race. I understand some people may think New Mexico will be close. It won't be, at least based off everything that we're seeing. New Mexico might even be safe on the presidential level as well. The Senate will absolutely outperform Joe Biden's margin, the Senate candidate there. In Illinois, that one goes blue. I would consider Virginia now to be a safe Democratic state. We don't see any real signs of the GOP is doing well in Virginia by any means. Since 2016, they've just completely faded into irrelevance, whether that's in the state legislature or that's within the governor's mansion or that's the Senate elections, House elections. The GOP got a lot of hits, and they haven't recovered since then. So Virginia, safe blue state. This joins the Northeastern states: New Jersey, Delaware, Massachusetts, again, contested Democratic primary, not so much contested general election, and then Rhode Island. And now, this is a new characterization for my channel. I'm considering Jeanne Shaheen's race in New Hampshire as safe. This race moves from likely, at one point in time was lean, then likely, and now is being rated safe. All of the estimations and all of the data that we have shows her with a very commanding lead and no real formidable Republican opponent. There isn't a clear frontrunner either. So for New Hampshire Republicans, it's going to be very difficult for them to have a really good chance at number one. The presidential level seems to be lost for them in New Hampshire. Hillary Clinton carried this state. They also carried a Senate race. They, being the Democrats, carried a Senate race here in 2016. So for 2020, not using 2016 alone, but everything that we've seen in the past has pushed New Hampshire further to the left, and all indicates that Jeanne Shaheen will be in for a very comfortable re-election bid. That state goes to the Democratic Party by a safe margin. I also consider Tina Smith's seat in Minnesota to be safe. I don't think Minnesota will be too competitive on the presidential level. It probably could be likely or lean for Joe Biden, but Tina Smith will likely outperform her margin in 2018 and enough to characterize this race as a safe state. I don't think the Republicans realistically have a shot here. Same way Democrats don't have a shot at South Dakota. So this leaves us 16 toss-up seats. And I know it's surprising seeing a number of these seats considered to be toss-ups. There are only 2 races here that have Democrat incumbents. That is the state of Alabama, and that is the state of Michigan. Out of the rest of them, they're all considered to be likely or below, which means that they're remotely competitive. We're looking at 39 Republican races that are safe and 45 Democratic races that are safe, which means the Democrats only need 6 out of the 16 remaining races to win the majority, or if Joe Biden wins the election, 5. And right now, I'm going to characterize all of the likely Democratic states for the United States Senate because it gives you a very good idea as to how this Senate race could end up on Election Day. Michigan, I consider to be likely for the Democratic Party. Gary Peters seems to be outperforming Joe Biden in all of the data that we see, and if you're outperforming someone with an 8-point lead, you're nearly double digits. Likely characterization for Michigan for the Democrats. Colorado, Cory Gardner is the Republican incumbent. I characterize this race as a likely Democratic seat, a pickup at that. John Hickenlooper is the former governor, very popular in Colorado, sort of well known nationwide. He ran for president in 2020, didn't really get any delegates, but Colorado goes to the Democratic Party by a likely margin. Neighboring Arizona, well, not really neighboring, but there's a point where I'm pretty sure you can stand in all 4 states at once, unless that's another part of the country, but I'm pretty sure it's that one. Arizona, this state, goes to the Democratic Party by a likely margin. I understand there's a Republican incumbent, and this is a traditional Republican state, or at least it has been. But in 2018, they defied all odds. They flipped the House. The Democrats flipped the House in Arizona, House of Representatives. They flipped the Senate there from red to blue, and now they're running Martha McSally. The Republicans are running Martha McSally, the losing candidate from 2018, up again, who is now the interim Republican incumbent, Mark Kelley, husband of Gabby Giffords. Very well known across the state, very popular, and outperforming Joe Biden in Arizona. And Joe Biden currently leads in Arizona, so that gives you a general idea as to how this race will go. In fact, I have the data right here. Let's go ahead and take a look at Arizona in particular. Mark Kelley leads by 6.8%. Oh, but weren't the polls wrong in 2016? No, they overestimated. They underestimated John McCain, but I meant not 2016, 2018. Kyrsten Sinema was supposed to lose, according to this data. Martha McSally was supposed to win. She was supposed to go on to carry this race. Nobody really expected Arizona to go blue after Florida had just been called for Rick Scott that evening. Arizona wasn't called until the morning after. I ended my live stream not knowing how Arizona was going to go with McSally ahead. Kyrsten Sinema ended up on top. Not only here, but on the presidential level, that's what I was indicating at for 2016. In the presidential level, looking at that data, President Trump was supposed to have a more solid margin for the presidential level than he actually did. And I know it's very minimal, but if Biden's leading by 3% here and Mark Kelley's leading by 7%, and the past 2 elections have shown us on the presidential level that Republicans are overestimated, and then in the most recent Senate election that Republicans are also overestimated, that doesn't end up good news in either of the elections, regardless of how you spin it. So Arizona, I'm comfortable characterizing that as a likely Democratic state. That leaves the Democrats at 48. The Republicans remain at 39. There's a number of races we need to characterize as likely for the GOP. This is a big one. Alabama, this is a flip from the Democratic Party. Doug Jones won here because he ran against a supposed child molester, and he still only narrowly won in Alabama in 2017. This is a solid Republican state. A Democrat hadn't been elected before Doug Jones in 25 years, so nearly 3 decades of Republicans holding both Senate seats. Jeff Sessions ran for this seat, lost in the runoff handily to Tommy Tuberville. Alabama goes to the GOP by a likely margin. I honestly don't see any salvation for Doug Jones at this point, especially considering that this country is increasingly more polarized. The GOP is running ads in Alabama, which may not seem effective on the presidential level and may seem comical, but they definitely will work in a state like Alabama, in a very partisan, very right-wing state. Their ads literally say, Doug Jones is a Democrat. That's all it says. And that's how you know it's enough to defeat him on Election Day. Alabama, likely for the GOP. I'm also going to include some other southern states, including South Carolina and Mississippi. These are 2 states I think the margins will be less than 15%. I don't think Democrats should look to these races as potential pickups by any means. I understand there's a lot of support behind Jamie Harrison. He's outperforming Lindsey Graham. And then there's a pipe dream from Mike Espy in Mississippi. There's all those scenarios where if Biden comes within single digits in Mississippi, the Democrats could win the Senate race, but we all know that's a long shot, and it's probably not going to happen. It didn't happen when there was a special election runoff. It was still an 8-point margin. That was pretty comfortable for the GOP. I understand it's Mississippi. Cindy Highsmith probably will underperform President Trump, but not enough for this seat to flip. I characterize it as a likely Republican state. Another state I think will be likely, I understand this one might seem hard-fought by Amy McGrath, but it's also Kentucky. Very similar landscape, electoral-wise, as Alabama and Mississippi and South Carolina. Typically vote for Donald Trump, typically vote for Republicans. I understand Kentucky, yes, went to the Democratic Party in their 2019 governor election, but that's very different from a Senate election. And we're talking about Mitch McConnell. I understand he's unpopular, but he's always been unpopular. His approval rating was lower when he last won by double digits in 2014 against Allison Lundergan Grimes. So there's a lot of energy behind her back then. There's a lot of energy behind Amy McGrath. I understand that there's a lot of money, but it's going to be wasted. Mitch McConnell, I can see, without a doubt, I could see him being reelected unless something drastically changes between now and November. I understand we're 100 days out, and a lot can happen, but it probably won't, because Mitch McConnell is probably one of the most vetted members of the Senate, considering how long he's been serving. So Kentucky, I would say, goes to the GOP by a likely margin. That puts the Republicans at 43. There's one more state I would characterize as likely for the GOP. That is the state of Alaska. So Alaska, I'm going to characterize as likely just because of the fact that Dan Sullivan probably will win with less than 15%. I understand Al Gross seems to be a winnable candidate because he's an independent, not a Democrat, in a state such as Alaska, where Lisa Murkowski comes from. Well, number one, Lisa Murkowski's approval rating isn't too high amongst Alaskan voters. I think her approval rating's 25-30%. And then we're talking about the same voting group that gave Donald Trump 14% more of the vote in 2016 than Hillary Clinton. I understand that seems mildly competitive because it's not 15%, which means it's not safe. But I'm going to go ahead and say that Alaska probably isn't too winnable, at least for the independents who probably will caucus with the Democrats. Al Gross and Angus Kings are perfect examples of people that ran as independents, saying they wouldn't, not telling us what party they would identify with until they actually won. But if you're an independent running against a GOP candidate, you're probably not caucusing with the GOP. But there are exceptions to everything. So the Democrats are at 48. The Republicans are at 44. Let's take a look at some of the other competitive races. So the reason why I haven't characterized Texas as a likely Republican state is because I think Joe Biden running up the numbers in Texas will bring down this Senate race. I think it could very well narrow up closer to Election Day. I'm not saying that the Democrats are going to win the Texas Senate race. I don't think they should pour money into it just because it's a lean characterization. Does not mean that I think that the Democratic Party should be viewing it as a realistic Senate pickup. This is just because Joe Biden is at his highest point in Texas that he's ever been, that the Democrats have ever been. I actually saw a comment in my previous video. It was right. Texas was competitive in 1992, but 1996, but you also have to realize there was a third-party candidate, and they were definitely taking a lot of votes away from both candidates, but more so the Republican Party. But the last time the Democrats won in a presidential bid in Texas was 76. And for Joe Biden to be leading now is pretty substantial, which means Texas very well could, at one point in time, what I characterized to be a likely Republican state, move down into lean that I now characterize as tilt for the GOP. In fact, I'm being very generous. In 2016, Texas was supposed to go to Donald Trump by double digits. He only won it by 9%. It was a 12% margin of victory according to RCP. He won it by 9%. It was supposed to be pretty large for him there. And I understand that's only a 3-point difference, but if Biden is leading by 1% now, and the polls have adjusted for their incorrect, their mistakes from 2016, that's a lot of bad news for him and Republicans down the ballot. Because if you're not winning in this race, it's going to be really hard to ride on a president's coattails that, again, are not there. If he's not winning in Texas, or he's doing very poorly in Texas, meaning the margin could be 1-2%, brings down every other statewide Republican with them if there's a Republican incumbent. Same goes for the Democrats, but obviously Donald Trump is the incumbent president right now. So Texas goes into the lean column. Kansas as well. The reason why I would consider Kansas to be a lean Republican state is because Chris Kobach is still the front runner. Unfortunately for the GOP, a lot of the stuff that they've been fielding and pushing off against Chris Kobach, I understand that Mitch McConnell doesn't want him to be the nominee. Pat Roberts doesn't want him to be the nominee. The Kansas GOP chairman does not want Chris Kobach to be the nominee, but the voters seem to want him to be the nominee. I believe a Roger Marshall internal poll was just released on Politico. Only has him up 3%. If your internal poll only has you up 3%, you're probably doing much worse than what you're expecting. Chris Kobach is leading in all of the data that's not considered to be internals, and that all indicates that he probably could end up winning. I do think that the last-minute push from the GOP probably came a little too late, but we will all see on Tuesday if Chris Kobach ends up winning. Right now, he's still the front runner based off all the data we have right now, but fundraising-wise, absolutely not. Not necessarily fundraising-wise, just more so money on hand, because there are very affluent people running in this Kansas Senate race, but Chris Kobach has the name recognition. He served in Kansas. He's won a statewide race before, just lost the one in 2018, and seems to be attacking actually Mitch McConnell and other members of the GOP for trying to interfere in the GOP primary here. But it looks like Mitch McConnell may be trying to avoid this race being competitive, which it absolutely will be. I think it'll be competitive regardless of who the nominee is, but Chris Kobach's the only one I could actually see the Democratic Party picking up that Senate seat. So there's 6 toss-up seats. 2 Democratic seats are needed to win the election if Joe Biden wins, and then 3 if they want an outright majority, meaning the vice president wouldn't break the tie, Kamala Harris wouldn't break the tie, but 48 right now. They have a number of areas that they can make a pickup in. There's 2 seats in Georgia. There's 1 in Maine, 1 in North Carolina, 1 in Iowa, all states that were swing states in 2016. But what's weird about Montana? Well, Montana currently has a Republican incumbent, Steve Daines. He's running against, guess his name, Steve Bullock, who's the incumbent governor in this race. He won in 2016. He won his re-election bid in 2016 with Donald Trump on the ballot. The margin was narrower than Donald Trump's victory over Hillary Clinton, but we're seeing a lot of data that indicates Steve Bullock is actually pulling ahead in this race. And also, we're seeing a lot of data indicate that Donald Trump isn't doing as well as he was in 2016 in Montana. And that makes sense. Montana has had a really weird history where they vote for Republicans on the presidential level, but sometimes narrows up, but still ends up voting for the GOP. And then on House and Senate and governor levels, the Republican Party hasn't won a governor election since the year 2000 in Montana. The House races have always been competitive. And the Senate races, they currently have 1 Democrat in the Senate who was just elected back in 2018. So Steve Bullock has a realistic shot. I absolutely think he could win. And right now, I think he's the favorite to win this race over Steve Daines. If Trump is underperforming his 2016 margin, and we're talking about a voting bloc that elected Steve Bullock back 4 years ago as well, they know his name very well. I understand being a governor, Phil Redison, won't always translate to a Senate election victory, but Montana is not like Tennessee. Tennessee doesn't traditionally elect Democrats. They may have in the 90s, but not so much now. Montana did so as recently as 2 years ago, and it was a Senate election. They understand the national implications of it. It's just that some of these Democrats, these conservative Democrats, really appeal to these Montana voters, as Steve Bullock has and probably will on Election Day. So that's a tilt Democratic state. I tried to avoid tilt states, but we're going to go ahead and keep looking at some of these races. Now, looking at Georgia, I characterized this one as a tilt GOP state previously. I'm actually going to move it over into the lean Republican column. I think that the Georgia Senate special election is likely, considering that the GOP candidates seem to be leading in the top 2 consistently. But for Georgia's regular election, in the same data that we see from Monmouth University or whatever pollster it might be, Biden does better than Jon Ossoff in this race. And looking at the Senate race, it is possible that Jon Ossoff does do worse than Joe Biden. I think that's a very real possibility. We've actually seen data come out that shows Biden on top in Georgia, but then down, the Democrats down 4% in the Senate election here, or at least the regular scheduled Senate election. And unfortunately for Jon Ossoff, he may end up peaking off at around 48%, the same way he did in his 2017 election bid. He's a very good speaker. I think he's a very good candidate in the future, possibly could run for governor in 2022, given that a lot of things are happening with a number of Republican governors, meaning a lot of them will be vulnerable in 2 years. But for Georgia Senate's regular election, I'm moving this one over in favor of the GOP. But the special election, I'm remaining in the likely column, because if the GOP ends up with the top 2 being Republican candidates, there's no way the Democrats could have won or could win in a December or January runoff. So that leaves 3 races. Let's actually go ahead and characterize a Democratic race that I think, and I'm starting to get way more confident in a victory for Sarah Gideon up in Maine. Susan Collins, previously very popular. I know I mention this every time I talk about the Senate race, but she went from being the most popular to the most unpopular. For the longest time, it was Mitch McConnell. I remember that. If you look back on my 2017, 2018 videos, when I would go through the top 10 senators and the top 10 most hated senators, Susan Collins was at number 1, or right under Bernie Sanders, around 70% approval, and then Mitch McConnell was around 34%. Now, looking at Susan Collins, she's roughly around there as well, and her disapproval is higher than Mitch McConnell's. And she comes from a Democratic state. I understand it was competitive in 2016, but Joe Biden will be winning it by a likely margin. I definitely could see. I think Sarah Gideon, as the data suggests, will underperform Joe Biden's numbers here, just because Susan Collins has been in the Senate since the 90s, previously very popular in Maine, so she still has some independents that are leaning towards her column. But unfortunately for her, this is not a predominantly independent state. We're talking about a demographic group, or at least centrist-leaning independents. There's always those left-leaning independents that always vote for the Democrats despite being registered independents. But Susan Collins will be leading amongst Republicans and leading amongst independents, but losing amongst Democrats and still be losing the overall poll. That's just because of the fact that Maine itself is traditionally a Democratic state. And Sarah Gideon, I don't think will win just because she's a Democrat. I think more so the fact that Susan Collins made one too many Republican votes right up until this election, and with an anti-Trump referendum that we are seeing shaping up, unless that changes, I don't see a pathway for her to win this Senate race. So North Carolina, I actually wanted to talk about this one because I really could very well characterize this race as likely. And I know that's a bold assumption, but I'm going to do it. So I wanted to save this one for last because I normally characterize this previously tilt, then lean, and now Kyle Cunningham, for whatever reason, is significantly outperforming Joe Biden in this state. I understand Tom Tillis wasn't exactly popular, but he's not exactly hated either. He's not popular enough that he would easily ride to victory, given he's a Republican from a Republican state. But, Kyle Cunningham is trouncing him in the polls that we have by 10%. Looking at the presidential race, Biden's up 5%. So this is a 5-point increase based off where Joe Biden is, literally exactly 5 points. So if Kyle Cunningham can count on that on election day, let's say Biden loses North Carolina by 3, he still wins the Senate race. And this is something that I really think the GOP is going to need to worry about. They haven't treated North Carolina too carefully, okay? I believe that they are holding parts of the RNC in North Carolina, or I know that they moved it from Florida. Originally it was supposed to be in North Carolina, but they're doing official convention business in North Carolina because they had a contract, whatever. Doesn't really matter. Again, these are all virtual conventions, so there isn't really going to be a convention bump in a home state. And even in regular election years, it's only by, 0.7% does that party do better by holding a convention in that state. So North Carolina, I think very well could see Kyle Cunningham easily elected to the United States Senate if everything is held today. That's basically where the map stands. North Carolina goes into the likely Democratic column. I don't know why I can't talk. There's something in the back of my throat. So we're going to wrap this up. Iowa, Joni Ernst. I'm going to keep my characterization from 2 weeks ago, or at least, 1 month ago. I think it's still going to be a tilt Republican state. Joni Ernst isn't doing too well based off the data that we see, and neither is Donald Trump, but I still expect Donald Trump to come in and swoop this race on Election Day, and then Joni Ernst narrowly defeating Teresa Greenfield in this race, ending up with the Democrats at 51 Senate seats and the Republicans at 49. Some of these race ratings have moved in favor of the GOP. Some of the others have moved in favor of the Democratic Party. Overall, the numbers don't shift much. Sorry, it's not my fault. The American electorate is boring, but yeah, that's pretty much how this map stands. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. And then in the bottom left of their screen, there's a bit.ly link that brings you to my Discord server. If you type that into your browser, it'll put up a little invite link that you can go ahead and join. On your screen, there's a video and then a playlist for my 2020 Senate elections in the past. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.